Hi there, and welcome to the second session of our Ukrainian Day, Elders' Stories. Today we are very fortunate to have three active elders of our community joining us. They are Libby Griffin, and Audrey Moysiuk, and Larry Kleparchuk. They are here to share with us their stories, which are in keeping with this year's Heart of the City Festival's theme, Stories We Need to Hear. To introduce them is our own Beverly Dobrinsky. Beverly, aside from being an accomplished singer, composer, arranger, writer, and artist in her own right, is also the conductor of our Barvinok Choir. It's been her lifelong journey to collect and research stories and materials to ensure that they live on and that these stories we pass on become part of a greater legacy that we all share as a people. And so it is my honor, my deep, deep honor, to introduce Beverly. Beverly?
Hi, thanks. Yes, I'm going to start out with a territorial acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam people, and who have been stewards of this land and been here for thousands of years. And we're going to be talking, and we're very thankful to be here, and we're going to be talking about this land and when our people came, how our people came, and with some of the people who are descendants of that first wave of immigration that started around the turn of the 1900s, turn of the last century. Before I start asking questions and sharing stories with Audrey and Libby and Larry, I'm going to start with a song that was collected in Vegreville, which is close to where they all are from, in 1965. It was sung by Mrs. Moysiuk, and she was from that very first wave of settlers who came to Canada in those early years. And so I'll just say what I'm singing about for those of you who don't know Ukrainian. Oh, by a high hill there are doves flying. I've never had any good luck, and the years are passing by. I've never had any good luck, and I shall not have any in the future. How am I to recall those years which passed by? And then she goes on to try and find her young years, and when she finds them, she wants them to come back, and of course they're not going to come back. And at the end she says, oh, Canada is a foreign country. The people are not my own. There's no truth to be had from anyone, and there won't be any in the future. Я гаразду, ой попід гору високою, голуби літають. Я гаразду не зазнала, вже літа минають. Я гаразду не зазнала, вже літа минають. Я гаразду не зазнала, вже не буду знати, по чим же я свої літа буду пізнавати. По чим же я свої літа буду пізнавати. А Канада чужий край, та й чужі люди. Нема правди ні від кого, та й вже і не буде. Нема правди ні від кого, та й вже і не буде. So clearly, she's looking back on her life. Clearly she's had a hard life. I want to open up and now talk to each of our interviewees about their own upbringings, and where they landed in Canada, first of all, what wave where were they born? I know all of you were born in Canada, but I'd like to know who came from Ukraine. So let's start with you, Libby, first.
Well, my dad came from the first wave of Ukrainians, and my mom came from the second wave of Ukrainians. So my dad would have come from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was Bukovina was part of at the time, and my mom came from Western Ukraine, from Volhynia, and actually where I grew up in northern Alberta was also called Volhynia or Volyn because so many people came from that region and they just called it Volyn. Yeah.
Thanks. And Audrey?
Well, my dad came over in 1912 with his parents and with his older brother. He was only 2 years old when he came over. It's a wonder he survived because some of those boats that they came over were not much more than cattle boats. And my mother didn't come over until 1929. So there was quite a gap there, but somehow in northern Alberta, they met. My dad and his family got a homestead somewhere in the Smoky Lake area. I think the nearest town was called Lamont. And my mother first went to an area around Willingdon, Alberta. But somehow, as time went on, they found themselves in the same region. And I believe it was at a dance at a school, in a school. They used to have dances in the school, big schoolroom, which housed all the grades at that time. And my dad had learned how to play the fiddle, and he was part of the orchestra that played for the dancers. And I guess my mother must have come there somehow, and that's how they met.
That's great. Thank you. And Larry?
Well, I come from a little town called Hilliard, Alberta, which is about 45 miles east of Edmonton on Highway 15. My mother was born in Canada, right about where I grew up. Even though she was born in Canada, she never learned English. She learned to speak English later on when all the kids used to come and visit. The reason she didn't learn English is because she didn't go to school. As the oldest in her family, it was her responsibility to look after all the other kids. My dad came to Canada, sometimes in the early 1900s. I don't know exactly when. He came from Brody in Western Ukraine. And I don't know much about what he did in Canada. He was, I guess, quite active. He was a carpenter, he was an investor, he was all kinds of things.
Was he grown up or was he a child when he came? Do you know?
I beg your pardon?
How old was he when he came, your father? Do you know?
No.
Okay, so you don't know if he was a teenager or if he was just a child?
I have no idea. I think it was his early 20s probably, or...
Okay, you think he was older probably.
Yep.
So I know that you've had different kinds of experiences when where you were born, because I know, Larry, you've already said that you grew up in Hilliard in a small town. Your family were not homesteaders. And you told me that your father did a lot of different kinds of jobs until he finally, settled into being a carpenter.
Yeah.
And you also told me that he was a small businessman. What business did he run?
Well, yeah, he dabbled in various businesses. He wound up owning a pool hall.
Right, in your town.
In Hilliard.
Yeah,
right.
That's interesting.
And as I say, he was much involved in construction. He built a church in Hilliard. Never went to it, but he built it.
But he built it. He was the carpenter, right? Right. And Libby, you had more of the homestead experience, right?
I was raised in northern Alberta on a farm 12 miles out of a little town called Rycroft. So
Right.
to give you some idea, was 350 miles north of Edmonton in the Peace River country. So I spent my whole time on the farm,
Yeah.
and actually started school in a one-room schoolhouse until they started busing us into the town.
And give us an idea of the size of your farm, what kind animals, what kind of farming did you do?
It was mixed farming. It was a small farm. It was very difficult to make a living with what we had. We were poor, but somehow when everyone else around you is poor, you don't even realize that you don't have a lot or that you are. And we were rich in other ways.
Right.
And probably our culture was one of those ways. One of those ways that
Yeah.
we felt that we were
Yeah.
enriched, yes.
Yeah. Audrey, tell us a little bit about where you lived and what kind of experiences you had growing up as a child in Alberta.
Yeah, just before that, I didn't mention that my parents were both from Bukovina.
Uh-huh.
And I think, were your folks from Bukovina,
My
Larry?
dad was from Brody. My mother was born in Canada.
Oh, I see. Okay. So then, after my mom and dad got together, the first place that I recall being is near the town of Elk Point, which is near to the place where they put up a pad for spaceships to land. I've forgotten the name of the place. It's bigger than Elk Point, but anyway, Elk Point had a hospital. That was one thing, and I was born in the hospital because my mother was having a very bad time, and so my dad rushed her to the hospital. And so that my first years were in that area. I remember living in my grandmother and grandfather's house at one time. And their house was built like the houses in Ukraine. The outside was whitewashed, white, with a broad line of blue around the bottom. That seemed to be a pattern that they followed. And that house had only 2 rooms, a big room and a little room. And when we were living there, we got the big room, and my grandmother and grandfather lived in the little room. And my dad built me a bed and painted it a bright orange. I think it must have been left over from painting some farm equipment. Anyway, my first school was also a one-room school house, and with all the grades in one room. I have some recollections of that. I went to school not knowing English. I didn't know what questions and answers were, so I was in big trouble. And my teacher she was very British. Of course, there was a big British Union Jack at the front of the room, and a picture of, I believe it was King George. And so I have quite a recollection of that. I used to have to walk to school over fields, even in the winter. I think we only spent a couple of winters there. But I often wonder, how come a coyote or a wolf didn't come along and gobble me up?
Hibernating.
Yeah, I guess so.
Thanks, Audrey. Now, you just talked about this one place, but I know when I interviewed you earlier that your family moved around quite a lot.
Oh, yes. Well, after a couple of years in Elk Point, we moved to a place called Willingdon, and there were a lot more Ukrainians around there. Around the Elk Point area, most of our neighbors were I guess English, Anglo-Saxon names like Lambert and McGuinness. I remember some of the neighbors. When we moved to the Willingdon area, there was a lot more Ukrainians there, and it was around where my mother had first worked with for a woman that her husband had died and she needed help, so she worked with her. So it was near there, and there was a community hall called the Pruth Hall, which I think was named after the Pruth River that runs close to Chernivtsi in Ukraine.
So there was a lot of Ukrainians there, obviously.
Yes,
yeah.
there were.
Yeah.
And then we moved, from Willingdon, we got hailed out there without any crop insurance. And so we had to sell everything up. My mother contacted her brother in East Cooley, Alberta, which is near Drumheller. He was working in the mines. And so my mother asked, whether my dad would be able to get a job in the mine. And of course, that was wartime by that time, and coal was in high demand. So my uncle said that he thought he had a pretty good chance. So off we went to East Cooley, Alberta.
Right.
Yeah.
So you basically had to go where the work was.
Yes.
Because you were not, you did have a period, you told me, where you did have a farm for a while, but then you got wiped out by hail or something, if I remember.
Yes, hailed out. That's right.
And no crop insurance. And I think, Libby, you told me a story about that, too.
Very similar.
Yeah.
What had happened is my dad had introduced a new crop into the area called alfalfa.
Alfalfa, right.
And it was doing very, very well. I mean, people in the surrounding area thought he was nuts for doing, because it was mostly wheat and barley that they grew. Right. But he grew this crop of alfalfa, and it was absolutely fantastic. And we thought finally, that Dad would make some money out of that, and we would be a little better off. And it snowed in early October before he could gather the crop, and we lost everything. And that kind of set us back for the rest of our farming days. Yeah. That's all it took, because there was no, like Audrey says, there was no crop insurance.
Right.
So it was at that time that they began to organize the Farmers Union, and my dad was part of organizing that Farmers Union. And the interesting thing was that every single farmer in that area, and they were all Ukrainians except for one family, they were Swedes, but everyone else was Ukrainian, and they got 100% of the farmers that joined the Farmers Union at that time.
Great. Yeah, that's really a big, important part of our history, coming from the prairies, and really lovely to know that your father was, active in that.
I have a picture of him at the convention in Edmonton, and it's one of these old-fashioned long pictures with all the delegates.
Right.
And all I remember from that time, because I was quite small, is I know he came home and my mom was so annoyed because I guess he had gone out to eat somewhere when he was in Edmonton, and he got ketchup on his tie, and she couldn't get it off. That's what I associate with the big Farmers Union convention in Edmonton, my dad's tie with ketchup.
That's perfect. That's great. Okay, very interesting. So we've had, there's variations on your backgrounds, not all exactly the same. We touched a bit on your families. I know that you all spoke English at home. Interesting, Larry, I didn't know that your mother, Ukrainian at home. I'm so sorry. I'm being so dyslexic about the two languages. Yes, all spoke Ukrainian at home, and interesting that your mother didn't speak English until much later.
Interject. We were not allowed to speak Ukrainian in school.
Right. That's right. Well, that's what I was getting to. So, but in your home, that's what you were raised in. Libby, you talked about the richness of our culture, and that was part of what sustained us. So speaking the language, I suppose you also had this Ukrainian food. You talked about Ukrainian kind of buildings. All of that was part of what we brought here. This is what we knew, our people. I want to talk a little bit about what it felt like when you when you went to school. You weren't allowed to speak Ukrainian. You had to learn English. this is when you started to have a sense of that otherness, I guess, that you weren't part of this mainstream. Larry, you told me that you did speak English and Ukrainian both already. You're like, you have older brothers and sisters.
Oh, yes, but they, as soon as anyone of the family grew up and would graduate from high school, they left and went to Edmonton or wherever to get a job and make money and make a living.
Right.
So there were never really more than two of us at home at a time.
Right, okay.
Even though it's a fairly large family.
Right. Yeah, how many? 10?
There are 10 of us,
Yeah.
9 boys, 1 girl.
Right, and you're number 9 in the run, right? If I remember.
Yeah, number 9.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Well, Audrey is only by herself, and Libby has an older sister, so quite different in the family size, too. That's interesting. My mother was the youngest of 13 in Saskatchewan.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I might add that in that area of central Alberta, there were a lot of families, big families, much bigger than 10 and 12, up to 20, 25.
Yeah, wow. No, it's so interesting. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this there's this encountering of cultures. You know, you were in, I think, Libby, you said your neighbors, you were mostly in a Ukrainian area.
100%, except for the,
Well, you said the one Swede
99
family.
and a half, because
Yeah.
there was a Swedish family, yeah.
Right. And Audrey, you moved around, so sometimes you had more Ukrainian neighbors, sometimes other people's. And Larry, yours was kind of mixed, your
The
area?
only person who was English, quote,
Yeah.
in Hilliard was the station agent.
Okay. So you had mostly Ukrainian. So it was actually going to school, I suppose, where you would first, meet that there's not Ukrainians. There's all these other kinds of people here, mostly Anglo-Saxon background, and that you started to have a sense of, well, first of all, you weren't allowed to speak your language, so that's a big thing, and so that already is taken away from you. And I want you to tell me a little bit about what that felt like. I know that there's some stories that came out when we talked about this. But before we even get to the school, I'd like you, one thing that really struck me, Libby, was when you talked about your mother and her experiences in Winnipeg before she came to Alberta, and how she was a housekeeper in an English person's house. So let's hear something about that.
Well, when they finally built a school in that community, of course she started when she was 8 years old, and they went up to grade 8, and then what? So she had an aunt living in Winnipeg, so she went to Winnipeg and got a job first working in a very rich home as a maid, and then later she sewed jackets during the war for the army. But she had learned some of these. She tried so hard when we were kids to try and bring us into this different world.
Yeah.
And I think I was telling you, one of the things that I remember is that she learned how to make stew with dumplings.
Yeah.
When she was in Winnipeg, and we just, as kids, we thought that was just the best. Never mind the vareniki or the pierogies or the cabbage rolls, but this stew with dumplings was just
It was this
food.
exotic food.
Oh man, this was wonderful.
Yeah, so you loved when that stew and dumplings was
Yeah.
being served.
And then, and she tried all sorts of other things, and some worked, some didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, well, you said she worked very hard to try and
She did.
Canadianize you, right? So that
She
you would
did.
be able to have a good life and fit in, and the food was part of it. Doing things in the proper way, I suppose.
Exactly.
She learned. Right.
Etiquette was important for us,
Right.
and manners, and all of those things to make it easier for us to
fit in.
to make it in this other world.
Yeah. Yeah, there was something else that, I can't remember it now. That's okay. You did tell me a story about going to school, and at school is where you had some of the, besides your mother already feeling these pressures and knowing this and doing her
Yes.
best to Canadianize you, I'll say, right? To bring you into this, different society, into the mainstream. At school is where you had some not very good experiences.
The very first experience, negative experience I had, when we were in the little schoolhouse on the farm,
Yeah.
All the kids were Ukrainian. But when we got into the town school, and in the wintertime, we wore valinki, which are these felt insoles that you put into your boots
into
to
your
keep
shoes,
you warm,
yeah.
because it would be 40 below or whatever, and
Yeah.
there was you didn't stay home. I can't remember ever staying home because it was cold. So I went to school with these valinki, and the kids just, teased me something terrible. But when I thought about it, it wasn't just we called them Anglo-Saxon kids, but it was some of the Ukrainian kids as well. And there was an interesting phenomenon that took place, in that if you were came from that early group of immigrants,
Yeah.
and you had been in Canada, 20 years longer than that second wave that my mom came with, well, there was already discrimination there between the first wave and the second wave, because they felt like they were already, I guess, more Canadianized or whatever. So I even had some of the, Ukrainian kids laughing at me too.
So this kind of internalized.
Yeah, there was discrimination within the Ukrainian community.
Wow, no, that's very interesting. Yeah, and that story about the felt insoles. So, of course, your mother responded and got you boots, as you said, right?
Oh yeah, we got boots right away, and the same
Yeah.
actually. She had been giving. She went to town and she bought ham to put into sandwiches for my sister, and when she opened up her lunch, and it wasn't. It wasn't the same as what other kids had.
Right.
I think it was probably superior to what some of the other kids had, the
Right.
kind of lunch she had, but she wanted the same thing as they had,
Yeah, the forces of assimilation were very, 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 very strong. Huh? Yeah, that's what we're talking about. You told me another heart-wrenching kind of story about, I think, was it you? Coming home on the bus with a friend who said to you.
Oh yeah, no, it was a cousin of mine.
A cousin.
Yeah, we had a discussion and I think it was the result of sort of the discrimination we felt, but he said, I wish I wasn't Ukrainian.
Yeah.
I wish, he wouldn't tell people he was Ukrainian. I wish I wasn't Ukrainian.
Yeah, that's what the feeling was when you were treated the way that you were treated, and you were called a terrible word too, right?
That was the first time I had heard bohonk.
Bohonk,
was when I went to the school in Rycroft.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Audrey, I think thanks, Libby. Audrey, I think you had some of those same kind of experiences, right? Would you like to tell me something about that?
Well, yes. Actually, it would have been at the school. Someone did call me a bohunk at one point, and I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't good because
you could feel
of the way it was said.
Yeah.
And did you want me to tell the Gopher story?
Sure. I would love to hear it again.
Yeah. Well, this was in the 30s, and so because I don't know if they know how old I am, but
well, we didn't even talk about that, but yeah.
So there was a bounty on gophers because they were, doing a lot of damage to the fields and everything.
5 cents a tail.
Yeah, 5 cents a tail.
Yeah.
So we did go out, my mom and dad and I, and we did trap some gophers, and we were to take them to the school, you see. So I took them to the school, and I noticed that the teacher's granddaughter had counted off her tails into the stand-up heater that we had in the schoolroom. So, she counted hers off, you see, and then she told her grandmother. So I thought, well, I'd do the same thing, So I went and counted off all my things. And so then I told the teacher, and she said, well, where are they? And I said, well, I put them in the heater. And she said, well, I was supposed to check them. And I said, well, I saw, I've forgotten what her granddaughter's name was, Gladys, I think. You know, she put hers in, so I thought I'd do the same thing. And she kind of looked at me like, you know, you were supposed to give them to me, and I was supposed to check to make sure that I was giving her the right number. Yeah. At that point, I had no idea of, you know, trying to fool anybody. I mean, I was as... Yeah. Anyway, so I don't know if we ever did get the bounty. I don't remember that part.
Yeah, that was a way to cheat you out of your money, too. So, Larry, you're kind of laughing when you're hearing the story about the gopher tails. Did you also do that?
No, but it's so true.
Do you have any experiences of racism, discrimination in your childhood, growing up in Hilliard, that you...
Actually, no. You know, ours is a almost completely Ukrainian community, and we were all more or less the same. So the only time we called each other
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
You called somebody bohunk.
No, I didn't call anybody bohunk, but the guys on the playing field would call each other bohunk and stuff like that.
Yeah. Right.
So they were not nice to each other.
Okay, that's all interesting.
But it is all in jest.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing some of those stories of childhood and some of the difficulties and what it was, you know, trying to navigate this new reality. I know for all of you that the Ukrainian community was a big refuge, right? You had that community that you lived in. And at different times for you, Audrey, in and out, kind of, depending upon where your family was at. But I know that you all, well, Larry got involved with AUC once he came to Vancouver, so that wasn't happening for him in Alberta. But for both Libby and Audrey, it was from early days, as children even. Different halls anyway. If not the AUC right away, it was another hall. You already talked about this hall in one of the towns you lived, or areas you lived, Proust Hall? That was...
Proust Hall, that was not... it had nothing to do with the AUC, as far as I know. Yeah.
Okay. Well, and already, Libby, you talked about your father being an organizer of farmers in that area. You could see that was definitely needed. Let's just talk a little bit more about that. I have here that you were involved. Libby, maybe you can talk a bit about the hall and your, you know, how you were involved in it, your family and yourself in your area.
It was an AUC hall, actually, in Volin.
It was?
Yeah, it was an AUC hall.
Yeah.
I thought it was massive. It was probably about 1/10 this size. And we went, you know, there was always someone there who would teach dancing or you know, singing or whatever, but mostly it was for socializing. There was, you know, my dad had a orchestra band, so there were dances there all the time. And there were, of course, there were baseball fields attached around. Yeah, so it was definitely almost like this, except on a smaller basis.
Yeah, it was a community hall.
It was a community hall, and you know, they built it together, and they raised funds to try and keep it going or repair it or whatever they had to do.
So it was a big part of your life.
Absolutely, from the time I was a little girl. And then, you know, when I got to about grade 9, I guess, and I had been taking, because my mom made sure that we all had music lessons, that we took piano lessons.
Yeah.
So then I taught the, you know, the choirs and even went to a neighboring community called Highland Park. They also had an AUC hall. And that would have been maybe 50 miles from where we lived, and I would teach the kids there. And so, yeah, I was definitely an AUC baby.
That's great. It was rich.
Yeah,
Culturally
right from
rich.
birth.
Beautiful. And Audrey, I'm going to pass it to you now. Talk about your involvement with the hall, with AUC or other halls, or what you did through your childhood and how you got involved.
Well, our first involvement was in East Cooley, Alberta. And, well, my dad got to know the people there and the people who were organizing the miners. So he belonged to the union and was always, whenever anything was going on with the union, he was always there. He was very much interested in things that would help with the welfare of the workers. And it was in that way that we became interested in, actually we went first to the Hungarian Hall. There was a Hungarian association that had a hall. I remember they had these great dances in the fall. That was really fun. It was the Ukrainians in East Cooley, and there was a few of them, would meet in the Hungarian Hall. And that's when we first, my dad signed us all up to what was then, I think it was just the Association of, it wasn't the Association of United Ukrainian Canadians, it was something similar. No, it was already at that time in the 40s. It was something very close to AUC, but just a little different. Anyway, that's where we first joined. And that's where my friend Jenny Brzozowski and I used to go on Friday afternoons. We got mandolins. My mother got a mail-order mandolin, which probably wasn't all that great. But anyway, we used to rush to Rosedale, which was between Drumheller and East Cooley. And we'd go there to have our, we had a little bit of a Ukrainian lesson and also a lesson to learn how to play the mandolin. And the teacher there was Bill Nikiforuk, and there was a small hall in Rosedale. And they had everything. They had a choir. They even had a gymnastics group. And our AUC halls, I think, across Canada all had gymnastics as part of their program in earlier times. So we got involved. We played the mandolin. He got us singing. The two of us sang duets and, and with their choir and whatnot. So that's how we got into that cultural part. And I have to mention, we went up, Edmonton was organizing a tour through Alberta. And so we, our teacher, Bill Nikiforuk, he wanted us to take part in that too. So he got us geared up to it, and we went all through northern Alberta. And I remember Highland Park, because that was a place where it rained so badly, and we had to go up this muddy hill. We had to push the bus to get up the hill. They were waiting for us with dinner, and we didn't get there until 10 o'clock at night.
Right.
So we still put on a little bit of a concert and had a little bit of a dinner. So those were some of my early experiences with the AUC.
Well, those are great. Did you meet each other in Alberta, or not?
No,
not
I don't know.
Vancouver?
When was that in Alberta?
That would have been in 1948.
You met where?
No, I wouldn't have. I was born in 47.
Oh, you're much younger.
Yeah, I was, yeah.
Yeah, you're much younger than Audrey.
Yeah.
Okay. And Larry, you weren't involved with AUC until you came to Vancouver, but you did tell me that there was the Ukrainian Catholic Church in your area, in your town, and that you were recruited to do some singing at Christmas time.
Well, yes, went to church to please my mother.
Right.
Okay, and yeah, every Christmas I guess the church organized a caroling,
Right.
You had groups of singers would go to various communities and sing for a handout.
Yeah.
And so my friend Angie and me had reasonably good voices. We were not trained, we didn't sing much. And we got recruited by the old timers to go with them. So, yeah, it was kind of enjoyable.
Yeah, I did the same as a kid too, with because I was raised Ukrainian Catholic, so
Yeah.
we did the caroling, and I really enjoyed it. But I liked the countryside of you, because you went in a sleigh, right?
Oh, yes.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty nice image in the snow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Let's talk about leaving the family home, because we've talked all about Alberta, but you all are growing up and anxious to kind of move on with your lives, as all young people are. Larry, let's talk. I was just talking to you, so let's talk a little bit more about your journey. I know that you went into the Army Reserves.
Well, no, that was briefly when I was up working in Yellowknife.
Right.
Okay. First of all, when I graduated, I went and worked in Edmonton for a little while.
Okay.
And then I got a job in giant Yellowknife mines.
Uh-huh.
And while there, I was recruited by one of the workers at the mine to come out to the reserves,
Uh-huh.
And so I got some basic military training.
Uh-huh.
You know.
So
Not
you-
much,
you-
but
you
enough
did-
to be able to shoot one end of a gun from another.
Okay, and you ended up in Calgary, Audrey. I know you did lots of different kinds of office work once you left school. I mean, you got your grade 13, you finished high school as well.
Yeah, I finished high school, which in Alberta is grade 12, but
Right.
According to the powers that
BC,
be, in
yeah.
BC, that was equivalent to grade 13, which is like first year of university.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that helped. But I started to do, okay, this was East Cooley, right? Well, we had a couple of unfortunate things happen there, and one of them was that we were flooded, and that was when, I guess, let's see, what happened first? Did we get flooded out, or did our house start on fire? We had both of them. So by that time, my dad was working in the mines there, and he didn't like it at all. In fact, he described going into the mine, and being from a farming background, he said he felt like a steer going to slaughter every time he went into the mine. And so after these unfortunate happenings in, I guess that was 1948 as well, actually when I went on tour with the Edmonton group, our house, that was when our house had burnt down. I didn't have many clothes to take with me. And when I got back from the tour, my mother and dad told me that they had decided that we were going to move. We had a friend who had moved and was working in the Ogden CPR shops in Calgary. And so he thought that my dad could get a job there. So we moved to Calgary. And we lived in a suburb called Ogden. It was a long way. I remember going from the bus, going to home to where our house was. And again, I didn't have any valenke, which what I understand, they're not just soles. They go right up your...
Yeah, you
right
stick
up,
them in
yeah,
your
they
boots.
fill up the whole boot. Well, I didn't have any of those. I had these fancy little white boots, and coming home in the winter, I froze my legs. So that's, and there I was from this suburb, and it wasn't a fancy suburb, and for some reason, because my marks were good, they put me into Central High School, which was just on the edge of Mount Royal, and if you know Calgary, that's where all the rich people live, and the students used to come down in their roadsters to the school, and there was I coming from the suburb. So that didn't help matters very much.
No.
I was very shy, and that affected a lot of things in my life, because, you know, being an only child also, and Libby, her mother already had some experiences in Canada. My mother didn't.
Right.
She didn't learn her English until I went to school. She learned from me.
Right.
So there were a lot of influences that really affected how things went. I think I need to live my life over again. Maybe that's why I'm living so long. I need to do more living now that I've come out of my shell.
Be like that woman who's going to go and retrieve her youth in the song.
Yeah.
But I know that in Calgary, though, also you got involved more with the hall there as well, the AUC hall there.
Yes,
right?
and
So-
that, of course, my mother and dad were aware of the existence of the AUC and that it was a more progressive kind of place, and wanting a Ukrainian community. They started going, and of course I did too, and I can't remember what I did first. I think I joined the dancers, I think, and then the orchestra, because I had learned how to play the mandolin in Rosedale, so I did it all at one point. I was in the dance group, I was in the orchestra, and I was in the choir as well. And
Thanks, Audrey. I want to get to Libby because Libby has a really interesting story from when she went from her small town of Wolin
farming
all the way
community.
to Kyiv. Tell us how that happened for you.
Well, my graduation year was 1965, so in the winter of 1965, there was an AUC meeting in one of the farmhouses, and Walter Makovetsky was there from Edmonton for whatever reason, and it wasn't at my place. It was at the neighbor's place, but this car drives up, and it's Walter Makovetsky, knocks on the door, and he comes in. He says, "I want to talk to you." And he said, "Would you like to go and study in Ukraine?" And I knew one thing, and that was that I was going to get off that farm come hell or high water.
Right.
And this just fell into my lap. So there I was 18 years old, never been anywhere other than the farm.
Yeah.
And by the end of the summer, I was off to Ukraine and in the Conservatory of Music. I was studying music, and I spent 3 years in Ukraine.
That is so...
And then straight from Ukraine, I came here.
You came back.
Yeah, I came
home
here.
again to Vancouver.
I came here. They needed a choir conductor here.
Yeah.
And so that's why I came to Vancouver. But of course, you can't pay rent or the bills or anything with by teaching choir at the Ukrainian Hall. So I actually got a job at the Co-op bookstore.
Uh-huh.
And I worked there for over 6 years. And then I went back to university. And so I've been here for over 53 years, 54, yeah.
And what's interesting is that the AUC was so critical to all of that happening for you, wasn't it?
Oh, that wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't.
Exactly.
My life, I think with horror, what if I'd married a farmer and had to milk cows?
Yeah.
I'm so happy that that it went in that direction. Not that that is not a noble thing to do, but it just wasn't for me.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Do we have anything? You just made some gesture to me.
I was just going to let you know that we just were about at the 9-minute mark right now. If that, I don't know, if anyone else had anything that they'd like to share, but I'd like to say that despite the fact that I've known each of you for quite a few years now, it's always nice to hear these very personal stories that you have to offer, and I think it just shows the richness, of these experiences of the immigrants, but also of each of you, the experience of you coming to our Ukrainian community, and each of you is a musician, a singer in your own right as well. As you mentioned, Audrey, you also dance and have danced in the past.
And play the band.
Yeah, and the stories you've mentioned and talked about today, there are common threads that run through all of them. I remember as a youngster finishing the meal, the family dinner, and we all sat around and sang. The instruments came out, You never left the dinner table. You sat around singing and continuing to eat and playing instruments. And many were not professionals, but we all sort of were able to share in that experience, and led by older people who, you know, were maybe a little bit more experienced. But it was just such a beautiful feeling to be around that table. And I think also what struck me is that a lot of the experiences that you had, those, you know, early experiences, some good ones and some not so good ones, have led us to belong to this organization, you know, the Association of United Ukrainian Canadians, and to sort of really find our home in a progressive community because of those experiences that we all have had and have shared. And I think that's it. I don't know if there's anything you would like to wrap up with, Beverly?
Well, we still have a few minutes left, so I just want to talk a little bit about you coming here to Vancouver and sort of end there, because we know that Libby came here in after her Kiev experience, so 60s?
68.
68, and I believe Audrey was here earlier, more like late 50s?
57, fall of 57.
Right, and then Larry, early 60s, late 50s.
60.
Yeah, and so let's just talk about, so you're both older than Libby and you were here earlier. Larry, just talk about how you found the AUC, because it wasn't part of your experience in Hilliard.
By accident.
By accident.
Yeah, when I came to Vancouver, I stayed at my brother Mickey's place.
Right.
Mickey happened to be secretary of the Vancouver branch of the WBA.
Okay. Tell people what the WBA was.
Workers Benevolent Association.
Yeah.
Now defunct, but
Yeah.
it was a very thriving organization for a long time, and very important one. And while here, I don't know exactly how. I think I was introduced to a youth club that was here.
Right.
And somehow or other, I don't know how, somebody suggested that I should join the choir.
Uh-huh.
At that time, I believe Karl Kowalski was conducting it. And so via the choir, and then somebody suggested that I do some dancing. So I tried that out, and lo and behold, I danced for 13 years or 15.
All right.
So
So again,
it just sort of evolved.
right. And again, it's a refuge, right? A community refuge that the Ukrainian, that our people set up for our people.
Oh,
And
yeah.
There it was there for you.
Yeah, over the years, I've learned very, very much about the organization,
Right.
from its beginnings to the present.
Uh-huh.
And it has a wonderful, wonderful history.
Right.
Unfortunately, most of the people who come around here don't know any of it.
Don't know much about our history. Well, we did a play, Bread and Salt, and we did something. We did some bringing that to the fore so more people would know who we are. Yeah. Thanks, Larry.
This, by the way, this particular hall organization here has a fabulous history.
Yes.
And it goes back a long ways. And these people here have been involved in social issues for a long, long time, very, very actively.
Yes. And you said that was part of what you also experienced. That was new for you when you came here in
Well,
the
it
60s.
was part and parcel of what I became involved in.
Well, you said, you talked to me about peace marches, raising money for hurricane victims in Cuba, like many, many kinds of social issues that you were very active in.
Correct. We've kind of fallen away from that as an organization. We don't do as much as we used to.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can always change that. We can do what we need to do. Let's just talk about the current, we only have 3 minutes left. Let's just talk a little bit about the current situation. You brought us to here, and how you see the future of this organization and this hall in particular. Libby, go ahead.
Well, it's certainly not going to be us
Right.
that is going to show the way for where this organization is going to go. I
Yeah.
mean, we're part of our history and part of the basis of all of this. But I think it's going to be the young people, and it's going to take on a different form because, I mean, we're first generation Ukrainian Canadians. These kids, these young people coming up are far removed from that first or second or third generation Ukrainian Canadians. So it's going to be up to them and the direction that they take. And I hope that the direction that they take is going to be that rich, progressive direction that we have been on all these years. But I think now, like, we can have a rest. I still can't believe that I'm being called an elder, but we can take a rest, and we're going to have to leave it up to the younger people now.
Yeah, pass on the baton.
Absolutely, pass on the garlic sausage.
Yeah. Thanks, Libby. Audrey, your comments about this situation?
Okay, well, I know that for me, it was a good cultural experience because, as I mentioned earlier, I took part in many different things, and here I got involved in the archival part of the whole story. At one time, we used to receive a lot of really quite beautiful magazines with pictures in them of different parts of Ukraine and the arts of Ukraine and whatnot. And I took it upon myself to enlarge these and mount them. And we used to put them all around the walls of the hall whenever anything was going on. Then when the hall was nicely redone and repainted, we decided we didn't want to stick all these things on the walls. But it did help me to sort of find another part of myself, of the culture that's within me. And as far as the future, as Libby says, it will be up to the younger people, and they may not find it. They are communicating in English. Most of them don't know Ukrainian, so this is going to be a deciding factor on a lot of things. But I know that a lot of the young people are interested in the culture and in the food as well. And I have a feeling it's going to go on for some time. And it'll gradually evolve. And people used to be active in all kinds of different causes, peace, the unionism, and all this. As time went on, different groups around, all across Canada actually, have developed that can do that kind of activism a lot better than we can. And we, at one point, decided that we can't do it all. We can do the culture. We can, delve into our own history and develop that part of ourselves and share it with other people. And that's what we've done, and the future is up to the young people, as Libby has said.
Thank you, Audrey. I'm not going to ask any more questions. Our time is up, and I just want to thank you all so much for sharing. Thanks.
Thank you.